Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about a way that we can view the world and actually live in it by simply making a few changes that may seem simple but may be profound in the way that we live. On the program today, our guest teaches movement and sound improvisation for healing. She is also an environmental innovator and founder of the Daily Bread Project, a community hunger organization. She is also author of The Earth Above, Heaven Below, and Voices Out of Stone. Today we're going to be talking about her book simply titled Serious Fun. To find out just exactly what this is all about, I'd like to introduce our guest today, Miss Carolyn North. Carolyn, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
It's totally my pleasure.
Now, I started to read the book, put it down, I was like, oh, and then I ended up leaving it, and I'm like, this is really an interesting way to take a look at things. It actually was very inspiring for what I had read so far. What I'd like you to do, if you could, is start off with a particular story that you have in there about, I believe it was a Czechoslovakian man who was conceived in a concentration camp toward the end of World War II?
Yes. This is an old boyfriend of mine, actually.
Oh, boyfriend.
Yeah, when I was a young thing traveling around Europe. And he was a person who had more fun than anybody I had ever met. He just turned everything into a game. And we had the best time together. And I asked him one day, how do you do it? You know, with such a story as yours, I've never known anybody who enjoyed himself as much as you do. And he stopped in his tracks, and he looked at me, and he said, would it be better to cry?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a profound lesson for me. And I've used it all through my life, just recognizing that we can be in despair if we choose to. There are many, many reasons to be in despair. But here we are, alive in the world, and we have a choice. And if you choose, and this is what I've discovered, is if I choose to have a good time, to be creative, to sort of have an imagination about anything that comes up, to turn things into enjoyment and art, actually, then the whole quality of my life changes, but also it changes the quality of life for everybody around me.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of took that as a general principle and said, if we were all able to do this, could we turn this world around? Could we live the way we are supposed to live on this planet that is such a miracle and such a gift, and create beauty and joy? So that's been my quest all my life.
And I think one of the most important points for our listener about this gentleman that you were just telling the story about is that he was homeless most of his life, wasn't he?
Well,
or at least a good
he
portion
left
of
Czechoslovakia. He walked out of Czechoslovakia
mm-hmm.
with two siblings, and they walked over the mountains and landed in a Swiss refugee camp where they lived for a year. And he was whatever he was at the time, 17, and he was just full of life and bounce. And so he walked out of the refugee camp and made a life for himself and was looking for home. It wasn't so much that he was homeless as that he knew he didn't want to spend his life living in Switzerland. He knew he couldn't go back to Czechoslovakia.
Mm-hmm.
And so he just did a lot of wandering and hitchhiking and looking for the place that felt to him like home.
Mm-hmm. I think today the reason I felt that this story was a poignant one is especially here in America, we're dealing with such tremendous loss, of homes, of jobs, of financial security, and a lot of people, they're either starting to question, was I going the right direction with my life in the first place, because all of a sudden I'm losing these things. Mm-hmm. It seems these are situations that are out of my control. How do I regain that sense of self and personal security that I thought with all of this that I was building around me?
Yeah. I think part of the problem is the fact that we live in a culture that is based on a material mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we think that the material, survival is the only thing that there is. I think that's a sort of basic mistake in a way, because then when you lose it, you've lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm all about, and what I write a lot about, is the fact that we are bodies in a physical world, and we are also spirits in a larger reality. And it's at both of these levels that we really have to live. And it's at that deeper level that we can find the real joy and meaning that makes for a good life.
Mm-hmm. You know, Carolyn, it's interesting because as I understand, you live in Berkeley, California?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, there's a wonderful documentary out there called Berkeley in the 60s. And they created what I consider to be an interesting paradox during that time. And in fact, it inspired the song, They Paved Paradise, built up a parking lot. And it was about a group of, I guess, students, if you will, and of course peers of the same age in Berkeley, California, who had actually found a way that in this park, that it was actually originally a park, where they could go around and they could find ways by working with restaurants to get food. They could go around working with clothing and so forth, to a point where you could literally live for free, which gave you that leisure time to explore who you were, whether it was through the arts, creation, crafts, whatever the case is. And the paradox comes from the citizens that lived around there that had to go to those jobs, that got caught up into what we were just talking about. And so they got upset enough to say, hey, law, get in there and do something, and that's exactly what they did. They got rid of paradise and put up a parking lot. But you see that it was
actually,
because...
let me just correct you. People's Park still exists.
Okay, but I just remember through that it seemed that they had paved it down. So
no, it still exists. We fought for that, and it's still there.
Okay. But you see the paradox, though, is where these people going, how come they get to just kind of live for free, even though they were being highly innovative? Well, I've got to be sort of maybe in some cases miserable, trying to pay my rent, my bills, and so forth, and that just doesn't seem fair to me.
Yeah, well, it's a mixed bag, because many of the people who do live on the ground in People's Park and scrounge, I mean, it's not as idyllic as it sounds.
Right, I understand.
But many of these people are really damaged people. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that, while many of us may not be happy going to our 9-to-5 jobs, I don't know that we'd necessarily want to trade with them. I think the trick is to find a way to live with real integrity and freedom within the framework that you have, whatever it happens to be. And it's not easy, but I think that we're going to need to do that, because I think the framework itself is breaking down. We see it, self-destructing all around us. And the banks may be the last to go, but still, there's a whole way of life and a whole kind of social construct that I believe is on its way out, which is partly why there is so much pain and suffering, because people don't know what to do with change. So it's a very exciting time to be alive, and also a very difficult time to be alive. I think it's really important to be ingenious and to be willing to innovate and to be willing to go outside what we call the dots and do things differently and ask ourselves the question, what is really ultimately important to me? What do I really, really care about? And when people ask themselves that question deeply and sincerely, they will discover that what they really care about is not another car or, a bigger house. That it's what we all want is to love and be loved and to be part of a community where we can do meaningful things and have a good time.
Exactly.
So it's an interesting time to be alive in the world, I think.
Now, in your book, you outlined basically 5 areas that you concentrated your book on, but as you had described, there could have been many, many more, but you felt that these would be pretty poignant to pretty much just about everyone. The first one that you started off with was about money, and it's interesting because about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, we were talking with a guest by the name of Olaf, I believe his name was, who wrote a book about the collapse of the Soviet Union and how America was on its way to following the same footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
But the differences between the two cultures, one of the biggest ones is they were able to handle it a little better than perhaps we could because of how much they stressed their infrastructure, such as public transportation and the
Mm-hmm.
like, whereas in
Mm-hmm.
America, we love jumping in our cars and going to wherever it is that we go. But one of the things that he had stated in his book that I thought was really interesting was, especially when it comes to money, was that in America, most Americans believe that you can't live without money.
Right.
Whereas there they had developed the bartering system, which actually takes quite a while to develop that well.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about your first chapter there and the way that you describe money and the new ways and innovative ways that we can begin to think about it.
Well, basically, I asked that question of what is money? You know, we take it for granted, but what is it really? And really what it is just, you know, little bits of metal and pieces of paper with nothing behind it. I mean, what's behind it is the fact that we have all bought into it. But in fact, if we could throw it away tomorrow and reframe the way we live, and what I'm proposing, and I'm not the only one doing this, is that we think in smaller terms. We go more local, you know, go sort of back to our neighborhoods and our circles of friends, and see how many things we can exchange in the course of an ordinary week. And it turns out to be an awful lot. Mm-hmm. So the necessities, the survival things is you need a roof over your head, you need food, you need clean air to breathe, you need water, and you need each other. And all of that is quite available without money, if you choose to do that. And so then the question is, well, how can I do that? So what I've proposed in the book is all these simple things that, in fact, I and my neighbors do. So, for example, every Tuesday, when I cook dinner, I cook a double dinner, and half of it goes to my next-door neighbor. And every Sunday, and this is a young couple with small kids, so during the week they're really busy, so it really helps them. And on Sundays, when they're around, they do the same. And then, I mean, people have always exchanged child care, for example, used children's equipment. There are all of these things that you can exchange with each other without using a cent of money. And so it's a different way of thinking about your necessities, but the more you can do away with this whole notion of having to have enough money, the less money you need, and therefore the less you have to buy into a system that basically takes away your whole life with work, where for most people you don't make very much money. Mm-hmm. So it's just it's a whole other way of thinking and going from this very large corporate sense of huge nations and these huge systems to very small and close to home. And when you get local, it is amazing what you're capable of doing.
That's the truth. Especially, as you're talking about, systems beginning to be disrupted or breaking down, the question you might be, ask yourself if you're listening to this, as you're listening to this program is, what kind of community do you have around you right now that you could reach out to? And maybe in some fair cases, there'd be a lot of people, well, we got a great community where we all know our neighbors, but that sometimes really isn't the norm. There are a lot of times you could be living with people that are next door neighbors for years and not really know who they are.
Right. Yeah, especially in New York City apartment houses. I've always been amazed by that.
They know your clothes, they just don't know you.
Right. You share a wall. and very often you've never met them over years. It's just sort of an extraordinary phenomenon, and I think it's very American. I don't know that, I don't really know, but I would imagine it doesn't exist in very many other places in the world where you live close to other people without knowing them.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk about food. What is it there that a lot of people can start to see differently? I know that living in Portland, Oregon, that you see a lot of restaurants, and we've got a bunch of them here, that really are what you call, they buy from community gardens, local produce. So you're not really buying into the large industrial agricultural complex situation. Plus, you just get better food all the way around,
Right.
and for a lot less money.
Right. Well, I think one thing that we've done is we have wasted our land. I mean, we could be growing food all over the place that we're not in small gardens.
Mm-hmm.
So everywhere there's a lawn that's easy enough to take out and put in some food. And it's amazing how little land it takes to grow enough for a family or two.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you get very large and you have these big industrial agricultural complexes of acres and acres and miles and miles and miles of growing food, and then having to ship it, which means using oil, which means expense, which means monoculture. It means all of these things that we don't want. If we could all bring it sort of back down to where we live and plant gardens, and even just for your own family, or better, little neighborhood gardens where everybody has an allotment, or you share the work, or there are a gazillion ways of doing it, we could basically produce most of our own food.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, it tastes better, and it's better for you, and it doesn't require this use of petroleum, mm-hmm. which is a huge problem all by itself on so many different levels, economic and environmental. And you're basically changing the way you live from being anonymous in a corporate world to being an essential member of a community in a local world. Mm-hmm. So somebody once said something like, keep everything local, all the survival things local, but have information be global. Mm-hmm. And I love that.
Very important, very important. I know that reflecting back on the Soviet Union again, Russia, there was a series of books that we did a series of interviews on about 2 years ago, and it was interesting because now, according to what I was reading here, that in Russia, citizens are given a house. Mm-hmm. Now, that's kind of nice. Hey, you get a place to live, and you don't have to worry about a mortgage or a bank trying to get you to refinance, so they get you stuck in that loop that a lot of us can get stuck into.
Right.
But they were also required to have a garden in which they grew what they had to grow, and that went into the community and went into a larger picture of agriculture as well for larger communities. And they said that just by that alone, that you were supplying enough food for pretty much quite a few people.
Yeah.
Plus, it created a $10 million surplus that went into the economy.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing when you think that what you just said about tear up the lawn and put in a garden, and there you go. And to give you an interesting example of that, my own wife's father does exactly what you're talking about in Skokie, Illinois. Uh-huh. Now, this is a place where you see rows and rows of brick-style houses, rows and rows and rows of green grass, and his has kale. You go to the back, it has beans and herbs and you name it. Yeah. And I mean, just how beautiful it looks, and it's all edible. He says, yeah, flowers are pretty, but you can't eat them.
Right. Well, it's just so obvious, you wonder how we missed it.
Yeah. Yeah, how we missed it. And, speaking of food, here's another area that we move into by the way we do things and how it would change a lot of things, and that's waste.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Yeah, that's one of my chapters. Yeah. Well, in the natural world, nothing is ever wasted. If you follow the cycle of, say, a forest, everything that is used up, that falls to the ground, becomes mulch for the next generation of whatever is growing there. And the same with the animals and their excrement and their urine, and everything is used. And we have based our own culture, we've sort of forgotten about the natural world and how the natural world does it. And so we have this huge waste stream, which doesn't fit anywhere. And we've gotten away with it so far because the earth is very forgiving. but I think we've passed the point of being able to get away with it because we've gotten so out of balance. So what I'm really interested in is how do we get back into the natural cycle? How do we get our waste products back? And one problem, I'm married to a chemist, and so we argue about this quite a bit.
Uh-oh. Plastic toys are necessary in this world for the communication economy.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, the whole question is, plastic, which is created by the chemical industry and which doesn't biodegrade. It doesn't break down. What happens to it? So my argument over the years has been you've got to teach students that that's part of being a chemist. Is you can't make these things that won't biodegrade because it's not going to fit into the natural order. How do you do this? So that's, it's a kind of wonderful question. And then I look at, I'm especially fond of art and all kinds of creative ventures. So I look at all this junk, all this trash that we throw out without thinking about it a second time, and say, okay, what can we make out of this? How can we create beauty out of, bottle tops? Or what is the other trash that you find? All the plastic that you find on the beaches. And, can this be turned into something else? And it's, of course you could never do that with all the trash that's been discarded in the world. But you could do it, the more it's done, the more it indicates a direction to do things. And the direction that it indicates is that you can have fun even as the problems are dire. You can take this junk and turn it into something beautiful and have a good time in the process. So that's kind of the direction of my thinking in terms of everything I look at, is how do we take it, get ingenious about it, see its potential beauty, create that, change its form, and change our own sense of despair.
I was thinking about one of the topics that you talk about, which is water in your book, and I thought, how did we ever move to a situation where we're actually out there buying our water now?
Oh.
And it's served in plastic bottles, and they don't even have a recycle. Well, they have the recycling, but, like, for instance, in the state of Oregon, you buy something in a bottle, you turn it back in for a nickel, except for bottled water.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Well, and where does it go to? You turn it in, and then what? It all ends up in some landfill anyhow.
I'm doing a lot more recycling. But talk about water and the different ways that we can look at it according to what you wrote.
Well, what I learned when I was researching for this book is that the amount of fresh water on the planet is a constant. And it's a very tiny percentage of all the water on the planet, most of which is in the oceans and therefore salt. So the fresh water recycles comes down as rain, falls into streams and rivers, and then is evaporated off the ocean as mist and then falls as rain, and so on. It's exactly the same amount that was there at the beginning of the world. What we've done with a very large percentage of this fresh water is we've polluted it. And so the amount that is available for humans and animals and plants is becoming smaller and smaller. This is self-destructive and crazy. And it comes from, I think, just simply not knowing the facts, thinking that we have this abundant universe which will provide for us no matter what we do to it. So in terms of, and we cannot live without fresh water. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, what you do is, first of all, you look at all the ways in which you pollute it. Or even before that, you come to learn about your own watershed. Again, bring it back to home. Sort of what is your particular watershed? What streams are you near? What happens to the water that falls as rain? If it falls on sidewalks and roadways, of course the earth can't absorb it. So what it then does is it goes right into storm drains and gets flushed out to sea, eventually, through rivers. And it picks up all the pollutants on the sidewalks and the roads and brings it with them. So you lose that water.
Mm-hmm.
So, one thing is, again, to have gardens, to pick up some of the concrete that's around your house. Driveways, for example. Driveways don't have to be concrete. If everybody did that, we would be opening up the landmass to receive rainwater by quite a bit, I think. And I think you're doing that in Portland. You're having swales. I've read about swales between houses that caught that water before it ran off.
Right.
And so that, first of all, that kind of awareness. And then to treat water as the sacred element that it is. We treat it as something that you turn on a tap and it comes out and it's always there, and you can have it hot or you can have it cold, and then it runs down the drain. I mean, we treat it like a commodity, which is really a mistake, because it is our lifeblood. We are 74% water. We're walking bags of water.